You're listening to the FI Team Radio, preaching financial independence and assisting investors achieve a more flexible and free lifestyle through smart financial planning and real estate investing. If you have any interest in leaving your 9-to-5 job and retiring early, tune in and listen to the stories of like-minded individuals who made the leap to financial independence.
What's going on, everyone? You are listening to the FI Team Podcast. My name is Craig Kurlop, aka the FI Guy, and I'm here with my co-host, Ziana McIntyre. Z, how you doing today?
I am doing great. I am unofficially selling a house in St. Louis, and our friend and previous guest, Sarah Weaver, may be putting an offer on it. So I'm pretty excited about that. And it's funny because in this show, we talk about how people say that they regret every house they've ever sold. And so it did flash in my mind, but I think it's going to be good. I think it's going to be okay.
Real good. And didn't you sell a house to Ben, or did you not end up going through with that?
No, so Ben's interested in the house too, but he hasn't made an offer yet. So it's going to be the Duke out. Ben, who was also on the podcast, versus Sarah. We'll see what happens.
We'll have to put them in a boxing rink and maybe they can have a pillow fight to see who gets it. You'll get that reference as we get into the show. But we've got an interesting guest today, Ernesto, who is a friend of mine. It's crazy. We've only been friends for like a year. It feels like it's been way longer just because of all the COVID stuff that happened. But yeah, he's doing some out-of-state stuff that is really incredible. He gives a lot of solid tips. So be sure to listen through the end because there's a tip he gives towards the end that is just something I'd never heard before and mind-blowing to me.
Awesome. Yeah, I think this is a great show and I'm really excited. I love that he kind of went into some more depth and kind of talked about his why throughout the whole thing. So that's the kind of stuff I love. But I'm a big fan of Ernesto for sure. Yeah,
he's a good dude. So with that being said, let's bring him on. Ernesto, welcome to the show, man. How you doing?
I'm well, and I'm thrilled to be here. So thank you.
Yeah, man. I'm so excited to have you on. We met... Shoot, man, it's only like a year ago, but there is a lot that's happened in that year. And you were so gracious enough to host me, even though you didn't even know me. So we've become friends since. And man, I loved your story. So I want you to tell it to the world. Let us know, like, how did you hear about financial independence? How did you come across this journey?
First things first, I was willing to host you because I knew where you worked at the time. So like,
fair enough.
Worst case scenario. I know you at the time. No, I'm just kidding. In terms of financial independence, you know, it's funny. One of the earliest blogs that I ever read, this is going to be hilarious because I'm watching your facial hair. Have you ever read the blog, Mr. Money Mustache?
Oh, yeah, you bet.
That's like one of, I think, the original blogs. It was one of the earliest that I found. And this was about a decade ago, maybe not quite as long, but he had been at it. And I forget how I stumbled into it, but his entire premise that he preaches is that financial independence is attainable for the average Joe, and it's not how much you make, it's how much you keep. So kind of prudent financial management. If everybody learns how to do that, then financial independence is super attainable, and you don't have to be the typical kind of case study of people that don't enjoy their jobs and work until they, aging and they can't really enjoy their golden years. And he was really, I think, the first person that really kind of set that light switch off for me, and it caused me to then shift my investing kind of interest from the stock market, which you have a certain amount of control over, but not completely, into real estate. So to answer your question, that is really kind of the first person that turned me onto it.
Me too. And probably half the world.
I think he's in Colorado somewhere, and then Craig shows up with a mustache. This is all too.
Yeah, I've actually been hanging out with him decent amounts. Maybe he's
have you really
to grow his mustache.
Hilarious.
Yeah, he lives up in Longmont, and I know I've got a membership to his headquarters. I know Z's been there a handful of times. Z, are you a member?
I'm not officially a member, but I'm really good friends with Carl and Pete, and so they just invite me to everything. So I'm there a lot too. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this financial independence community is pretty darn small, and so. Ernesto, we're happy to welcome you to it. Back in 2011, like you're kind of an OG too, just learning about it back then. And so you learned about this whole financial independence thing through Mr. Money Mustache. It's not what you make, it's what you keep. What did you do about that? Like, okay, you read it. Now what?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think specifically some of the habits that changed in me is I just started to really be more careful about how I manage my money. I still enjoy doing fun things. Don't get me wrong. I love to travel, but when I was younger, I had kind of an appetite for, name brand things. And I thought that I wanted a Mercedes and I thought that I wanted the fancy watch. And it really kind of caused me to shift my priorities and think long term, kind of mid and long term. And I kind of stopped doing those things. It's like, you know what? I don't really value those things as much as I think that I do. I really like kind of the time freedom that this person has. And if the sacrifices that I have to make is how I spend the money that I'm already making and not so much like putting myself under this strain to earn more, then I'm just going to have way more control over my time. And I'm not going to be one of those people. So thanks to him and kind of learning those things, that's where I kind of started to make some adjustments.
What were you doing at that time? Like, what were you doing to earn income?
Yeah, I worked for Verizon Wireless for a long time. I actually recently left them, but I was in a W-2 like most people. I did enjoy it. I wasn't happy showing up to work, but I did it anyway because it paid the bills and it provided me an income and a lifestyle that allowed me to live a comfortable life and then still have some money left over at the end of the month to kind of stock away. So at that time, that's how I was earning my money.
So you were working at Verizon, you were starting to learn about this whole financial independence thing. This is 2011. I guess, when did you start making moves to not just, you save a certain lump sum of money, right? And then the whole idea is like to go invest it, right? And so when did you start your actual investing?
So one of the earliest kind of pieces of advice that I received, investing related whatsoever, was, hey, start your 401k. This company gives you a 6% match. And in hindsight, I really had no idea what that even meant. Like a lot of people, I come from, a family that has no clue about financial management. Both of my parents stopped going to school in the third grade. They grew up in rural Mexico. Like this idea of higher education and financial management, like it's just oblivious to them. And so I didn't really have a lot of people around me to give me any kind of advice. And I didn't know what I didn't know. So the first step was opening up that 401k and taking advantage of the 6% match. So that was the first thing I did. And as I aged, I was like, well, I have no control over that. And I don't want to be 65 until I can touch that money. So I started to get better at saving. So the other thing that I learned from Mr. Money Mustache was index funds. So he's very passionate around, like, if you're going to be in the stock market, this is the way that you should do that, which led me to another person I'm not sure if you're familiar with. He's got a fantastic blog, which became a book. It's called J.L. Collins and H. So then that was like my second step. I was like, okay, now that I've learned from Mr. Money Mustache that I want to have just way more oversight over the money that I do have and start to stockpile some of it. It was like, okay, well, how do I deploy it? And I found that blog and I logged into my 401k account at work and started transitioning all that to index funds. And I did the same thing in the stock market. So that was kind of the second evolution, which then, over the years, you start to realize, wait, it's amazing how many geopolitical things influence the stock market. Like, oh, North Korea is upset at America today. Amazon's down 10%. I'm like, I had no true control over this. And so once I had been active in the stock market, I wanted to deploy it into something that I truly have more control over. And I stumbled into Bigger Pockets. So the Bigger Pockets, I started just learning all the different strategies that one can learn and then take action on. And I started to just learn about all things real estate and decided at that point that I want to start investing in single family residential, specifically the BRRRR strategy, thanks to what I had learned in Bigger Pockets.
Great. So before we jump into your whole real estate thing, because what's really great about your story is that you do a lot of BRRRRs and you do flips. And most of newbie investors that I talk to love the idea of a BRRRR, but it's kind of an advanced strategy. So I'm like, don't do a BRRRR right away. But I think they'll be excited to hear about you doing BRRRRs. But you said some really important things. You talked about J.L. Collins' book, Simple Path to Wealth. So I want to just highlight that so people can find it because it's probably the clearest, easiest to read, not boring book on financial independence. I think that's a great one. And then I wanted to highlight the story of your parents because I really think that is what the American dream is. It's not that you're just here and everybody can have the picket fence, but it's the story of immigrants coming to this country, because everyone who's here is some form of immigrant. And then they have that next generation that gets to do something bigger than they ever dreamed. And so it's so lovely that your parents coming here without any financial education, all of a sudden, then just next generation, you're able to explode with all the information and create a really amazing life for yourself. So I'm feeling super inspired by that. And I would say the same is true for me. My mother's from Puerto Rico, and she didn't speak English until she was like 20. And my father is like a second generation from Mexico. And so it's just really cool to see that this dream is alive and well. So I just wanted to highlight those things that you'd said. You can continue.
Hold on one second. I have a mystery that I need to debunk. Is it your last name McIntyre? Is that does not sound Spanish to me in the least bit.
Totally. Okay. Well, let me debunk it. So my father, his mother was from Mexico. His father was from Scotland. And so immigrants in the U.S. Yeah.
I see. Okay.
Totally.
So there's a little bit of Scottish in you somewhere.
Yeah.
Ernesto, I also have a question for you. Like, where are you now when you start investing in real estate and found BRRRR?
Good question. So back to Ziona's point, well, kind of the topic that, the whole immigrant first generation thing is something very important happened that I don't often include, but I think, within the context of our conversation now, it was 2013 that growing up, I always dreamt of wanting to help my mom buy a house. I didn't know anything else. I didn't know how to finance it. I didn't know what was involved. I just knew that my mom, she just kept saying, she was like, I would love, like, it's my dream to have my own house. And so we did. So her and I in 2013 went half and half on a house. And it was a proud moment for me because it's good to know that you help your parents kind of accomplish one of their dreams. And fast forward, that's become a tremendous benefit because although I had to, so like one of the classic, mistakes that we made is we assumed you had to put a 20% down. So we saved probably for a heck of a lot longer than we needed to. So together we came up with a 20% down payment, and then we get my mom her house, which ironically has a white picket fence. And fast forward 7 years later, there's so much equity in that house that one of my favorite, easily accessible forms of financing to put down payments or partially fund my flips, what the hard money lenders don't fund, is the equity line of credit. So by me doing something just nice for my mom, did it set me back a little bit because of the cash that we sunk into the down payment? A little bit, but I like to think that I can now grow that money exponentially via a HELOC. So little detail that I wanted to throw in there.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's amazing. Are you co-owners with that on your mom, or did you just kind of front her the down payment and she's just nice enough to let her use a HELOC on the house?
It's just me on title. Her income is so low, she would have never qualified for the mortgage. My mom, to this day, I'll be frank, she cleans hotel rooms for a living, which is a big part of my why, which maybe we'll get into. But those will be the background that I come from.
Right. Is she still in Mexico?
No, she's in Monterey, California.
Dude, nice.
Yeah.
Beautiful area. You hooked her up.
She loves it. Yeah. And so, we're getting to a point where it's like, Mom, there's enough equity. We can get creative. Do you want to retire? She's like, no. She's like, I love coming home to my house every day. I love living a block from the ocean. I'm so happy here. So she wants no part of moving.
I do want to say that my mom was a house cleaner too. And so I used to go with her because sometimes they couldn't afford daycare. Right. So I would go with my mom and I would just hang out in the house or watch a movie or something, and she would clean. And now it's so amazing that I get to hire these moms because I have a whole Airbnb business. You might not know that about me, but I employ a lot of cleaners, and a lot of them have their kiddos. And I said, yeah, bring them. And so it's so lovely to have that just one generation later that I can hire 5 different moms and keep food on the table and have their kids there. So yeah, it's amazing what you can do just, one generation later.
Yeah, totally relatable.
Awesome.
Incredible. Cool. So you bought this house for your mom. You've got this HELOC available. 2013, you start learning about BRRRPockets, or 2015, you start learning about BRRRPockets. When is your first true investment?
I would say I probably stumbled into BRRRPockets late 2016, early 2017, and I just inhaled it for about a year. I remember I had a job that caused me to drive a lot. I was in my car commuting for altogether 3 hours a day. And I remember playing the podcast back. This is before David Green. Like it was just Josh Dorkin and Brandon. And I would play the podcast at like 2 times speed because I couldn't get enough. And so I got probably hundreds of podcasts over the course of that first year, some pivotal books. And I had never read that much in my life. I never really cared to read leisurely until BRRRPockets, until, at the end of the show, people always recommend a book and I would jot them down and I would go through as many as I could. So it was, I would say early 2017-ish that I stumbled into BRRRPockets, and the first intentional kind of investment purchase that I made was long distance, partly because of David's book. And it was in Indianapolis because the barrier to entry was just so low. And compared to the Bay Area, it was just super, super kind of low risk. Even if something were to go wrong, it wasn't going to crush me. And so I just kind of fell in love with the idea of investing long distance.
I love that, man. I love that you're in one of the most expensive markets in the country, Oakland, California, Bay Area, right? And you did not let that stop you from investing, right? First off, you brought your mom a friggin' house in Monterey, which if you guys don't know Monterey, it's just a beautiful part of California right on the water. And you didn't let it stop you, right? So now you're in Indianapolis. How much money did you need to invest in Indianapolis? Like how much did you save up at that time?
Yeah, that first purchase was a combination of the cash that I had kind of re-saved after, literally drawing my bank account at the time down to zero to be able to fund that 20% down payment for mom's house. Fast forward a couple years later, well, more than a few years later, I had then accumulated enough to do 2 properties at once. So I got a little confident and acquired two BRRRRs at around the same time. And between my cash that I had stashed away and then taking a loan out of my 401k, it was probably in the range of about $120,000 to fund both of the BRRRRs. And that's for the purchase and the rehab altogether.
Wow. Okay. So $120,000, and these are 2 properties you got for $120,000. Single family homes, or what did those look like?
They're both single family homes, kind of 3-bed, 1-bath, really kind of cookie cutter floor plans in Indianapolis. Yeah.
Okay. And what about these properties made you want to buy them?
Even then, I was just really, really naive. I took what I had learned from the podcast and deciding that the BRRRR strategy sounded attractive to me. I used David's book as kind of a model to ask certain questions and just to wrap my mind around the concept of a BRRRR, because it's not as simple as buying turnkey. There's a lot of other kind of factors to consider: how much rehab, what we think the appraisal is going to be, et cetera. And I had enough, after having had some conversations with the realtor that I had really clicked with at that time, who I'm no longer in touch with. She suggested a couple of properties, and I had enough for both, and so I decided to just give it a try.
Right.
I was curious about, if you had a whole team, because sometimes when people go long distance, they go with a agent who has kind of an unofficial team, right? So they're doing kind of a turnkey, I would say, like a quote unquote, but did you have to go out then and find your own team and manage a whole BRRRR from afar?
I networked in the Bay Area, and it's funny, the very first meetup I ever went to, and again, I think one of the things that I don't think we discuss enough is how we change as people when you start investing in real estate. Like, it's not just about like what things have to be done. It's who you have to be and who you become, like just the growth that you have. So for me, stepping out of my comfort zone, I'm pretty social by nature, but I typically, I kind of like my clique of friends, and I was never really one to go out to random meetups. So I went to my first meetup, strangers, none of whom I knew. And at that very first meetup, I'm sitting at a table, and I had already kind of done some research on my own to the best of my ability and decided that, the market statistics of Indianapolis were kind of interesting to me. And I go to my very first meetup, and I'm sitting at a table with a couple of guys that we make introductions, and they're investing in Indianapolis. And so we exchanged information, and they were a good kind of starting point, and they made some introductions. Kind of getting back to your question, though, in terms of forming a team, the very first person that I worked with was a broker who claimed to be able to deliver on all the services. Ernesto, I can help you acquire it. I have rehab teams, and we are property managers. And that ended up not working out so well. And luckily, we were able to cut ties before we got too deep with the rehab process, and I had to go and find my own kind of rehab person, mostly through the Bigger Pockets forums, quite frankly. So that is kind of how the first ones came about.
What didn't work about your first team, and what do you think you could have done to prevent going with someone that wasn't very good?
Yeah, I think it's not enough to kind of interview people. And in hindsight, a lot of the questions that a newbie would ask, it's almost like you're trying to figure out if you like that person. You don't know what you don't know. You probably haven't heard enough about what can go wrong. So you are just so impressionable, especially with your first couple of deals. And you just kind of trust, unfortunately.
Yeah, I've found that too. Anytime that I've failed, it's like I take them for their word. Right? I take people for their word. Like, Ernesto, I think you're a man of your word. Ziana, I'm sure you're a woman of your word. And I like to think I'm a man of my word. But not everyone is like that, right? Especially when push comes to shove. And yeah, you really just have to document as many things as you can and just get people that are trusted and verified by others.
Yeah, I'll give you a specific example. With the BRRRR strategy, you're really trying to hit certain ratios. Like you want your purchase plus your rehab to be, people say 75%, but I'd say closer to like 72% because of your closing costs on your mortgage when you refinance. And if you can do that successfully, then yes, and your appraisal comes in and everything checks out, then you are going to, in theory, recover all of your funds. However, if you are new and you don't know how to dissect the rehab scope, for example, all you kind of care about is the number. I know that I'm under contract on this property at $50,000. And my contractor gave me a scope of work that says $22,000, but I'm super new and I don't really know if this makes sense or if I'm paying market rate or not. I just know that my numbers are going to work. This feels good. I'm going to go with it.
Right. And I love that, man. I love that you were maybe not comfortable, but you were okay moving forward without actually knowing the full picture, right? Like I think a lot of people probably stop at that point. And I was just at like a conference this past weekend, and actually the guy Rob O'Neill, the guy who shot Osama bin Laden, was there. And he said one thing. He said, fear is okay, but panic will kill you. Right. So I think you kind of, even though you probably didn't know that at the time, but it seemed like you embraced that fear. Yeah. Like you're afraid, like you're probably nervous, but you didn't panic. You went through your systems and it seemed to have worked out for you. So I just love that.
Yeah. Back to like who you become as a result of real estate investing. I'm a much more accountable person because in the end, everything is your fault. Like everything. Like, yeah, the contractor may have screwed you. Yeah, this rehab may have gone wrong. Yeah, you paid more than you thought you should have. Ultimately, that's going to make you better, and it is your fault. And if you just continue to learn from your mistakes, hopefully you combine that with learning from the mistakes of others, you will get there faster versus just being so terrified or panicking when something does go wrong, to your point. And then you just kind of throw your hands up in the air. Or you do this on the coast and your project goes terribly wrong and you're out $200,000 versus like $15,000, which is not going to take you that long to make back. And then it just gets you to realize that in the kind of grand scheme of things, it's not a mistake that's going to kill you. And going forward, you're going to become better because of it.
Right. And I'll say that every single real estate investor or investor that I've ever talked to has made mistakes in the tens of thousands of dollars, and they're still at it. They're still with it. So if you're going to get on this journey, just expect to make mistakes in that tens of thousands of dollars range. And it's okay. Like it's part of the process, and just don't let it happen again.
So let's go into the deal numbers, right? I mean, we are way into this podcast and we haven't talked any numbers. I can't believe Craig's not falling over in his chair.
I know. Well, sorry, there's so much to catch up with Ernesto here. Yeah, Ernesto, give us some of your numbers.
So that first deal, my purchase was $37,500 was the price of the home itself. My rehab came back at $16,000, so that puts me at $53,500. You throw in, it was about $1,100 in closing costs. So that puts me at about 55 even, coincidentally. My appraisal came back at 73.5 when I got the bank loan. So I did get much of my money back, not all. With closing costs, I think I left about $6,000 in the deal, just to make the numbers nice and round for everybody. And now I'm renting it for $875. My first tenant, so I'm on my second tenant there. My first tenant was, I think, $750, but the market has picked up. That neighborhood is improving. So on that specific deal, I mean, those are numbers that I would say that those numbers in Indianapolis are getting a little bit harder to find as the market has kind of increased. But I mean, for me, those are numbers that I'm super happy with.
Yeah. So I mean, those are crazy low numbers for most people listening to this podcast, especially if you're in a big city. And Ernesto, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think BRRRRs work a lot better in those markets where they're just cheaper, right? Because in order to refinance 20% out, right, I mean, $70,000, that's only $14,000 you have to add, or you bought it for like $50,000, you only have to really add $10,000 of value, right? Whereas if you're in Denver, right, the property is $400,000, now you have to add $80,000 of value, which is a lot harder to do. And so I get people all the time coming to me in Denver, and Zia, I wonder if you do too up in Boulder. And I'm just like,
Totally.
you're not BRRRRing here. Like there's too many big dogs. It's too expensive. It's too much rehab. And honestly, even after you do the rehab, you're not going to get your money back. So I just want to tell everybody that BRRRRing is really made best in markets, like Indianapolis and in those cheaper places. But
Yeah,
tell me if I'm wrong.
No, I agree. I mean, Mr. BRRRR himself, David Green, put out an article, if I remember, about 5-6 months ago, and he said, "Hey, everyone, this is why I'm not BRRRRing right now." And he goes into, in detail why. Partly because of the cycle of the market that we're in, the cost of properties is just too high to make it work in most cases. And on the coast, where the rental numbers just don't support the loan after you refinance out, like you're not even going to come close. So, absolutely, I agree. Much harder to do in higher price markets.
Right.
Yeah.
And you mentioned something too. You mentioned that you didn't pull all of your money out, right? You left $6,000 into the deal. So were you happy? Were you sad? Like what happened? How did you feel?
I was not upset. I mean, I sat down and calculated my cash on cash returns. And from what I remember, I was still in about 50% cash on cash, which the way I look at it, I was able to acquire a property and rehab it and cash flow close to $200 a month on that by leaving $6,000 in the deal. Like had I gone through the traditional purchase price or the traditional kind of investment loan process, I'm looking at 20 to 25% in a down payment, which is going to take me, after a few of those, I need to basically kind of take a break from investing and save up more money, right? So beyond that, like you go through the process of doing the cash out refinance, learning a lot about the details of rehab, which just make you, and this is another point that David has made in the past, being a BRRRR investor makes you good at different areas of real estate investing. And if you can BRRRR, you get familiar with the rehab process and managing rehabs, then that translates pretty closely to doing flips as well, which coincidentally is kind of where I'm focusing on now.
I'm curious if anything went wrong for you, because when you were laying out the numbers, I was kind of waiting for you to say like, and it didn't work. But I'm amazed that your very first one, like, I just want to be like, congratulations. How the heck? And yeah, what went wrong along the way?
I've since done many other deals and things have gone wrong. And that's where a lot of people now know me from. There's a community on Facebook called Indianapolis Out-of-State Investors. And part of what people enjoy about that community is it's very organized. So we don't allow for like spammy posts and just kind of a bunch of self-promotion, but we're pretty authentic about the things that can go wrong. And people definitely need to be mindful of things that can go wrong. I would say for me, one of the biggest mistakes that I've ever made that I highly recommend nobody ever does is I actually bought my first 2 properties without a property inspection, which is crazy risky. Got a little excited. It wasn't made to be a super important point, anything that I had ever read or listened to. But on a future deal, I ended up having to spend about $9,000 in foundation work because I had never gotten the property inspected. In the Midwest, another thing that's really common, and now more and more people know about it, partly because we discuss it out in the open more often, is on the West Coast, I think they call it a sewer lateral. In the Midwest and in Indianapolis, we call it a sewer scope. And it's the process of getting not just the property inspected, but getting the kind of sewer line that goes out to the city sewer. A lot of the older properties that were built in 1920s and 40s and 50s, they were made out of clay back then, and those can collapse, and they're extremely expensive to repair. Well, they range anywhere, depending on the damage, $5,000 to $20,000 I've heard. And so based off me learning from other people that can go wrong, I now kind of build that into my process. And in one property that I was under contract on, I made sure to get that sewer scope done and realized that it was damaged. And so the numbers didn't work. So I had to back out. So things can go wrong, I'd say, and they have gone wrong for me. And I would say both of those inspections is critical when you're doing your due diligence.
I love that, man. And thank you for sharing that. I think skipping an inspection is tripping over dollars to pick up pennies, right? It's like you got to do these upfront diligence because that saved you tens of thousands of dollars. I've got my third house hack, right? I literally knew about sewer scopes and I actually just forgot. Like I forgot to do a sewer scope. And I was like, oh shoot, it was like closing. I was like, oh, I never did a sewer scope. But people are living there, so I assume it's okay. I just found out, this is now 2 years later since I purchased that one, that there is a massive belly in my sewer line underneath my basement. And basically in order to fix it, they need to, jackhammer the concrete, take out the old pipe, put in some new pipes, and then lay the floor and all that and restore it all. And I asked my contractor how much it's going to cost. $27,000. So I could have saved probably $27,000 on this disgusting of a thing if I had just remembered to do a sewer scope. And, it's fine. That property has made me a lot of money already. So like, that's the other thing is like, the property's probably made me like 50 grand, right? And so just throwing 27 back at it suck. Absolutely. But at least I know it'll be good forever now.
Yeah. And do you have to do it? Because sometimes you can just, they do this thing where they send like high pressure water through once a year and it's like good enough. No,
I mean,
I'm all about not fixing shit if you can hold off.
Yeah. I mean, I can get that done every like 3 months or it's like every 3 months. They said it's pretty severe. And the reason why it's so bad is because basically what happens is like when the upstairs washer dryer drains, there's a kitchen downstairs. And so the sink fills up and it tends to overflow because the drain just can't catch it. And so then the kitchen like floods over. So it's a pain in the butt.
Good. Yeah.
But
at least it's not poopies in the basement.
At least it's not poopies. Yeah, that is bad. I've had that before too.
Yeah.
But Ernesto, let's get back to your story. So you left 6,000 in the deal. Again, I think that is a huge thing. And yes, don't skip out on your inspections. And what did you do with the extra money? Like, did you reinvest it into the next one?
Yeah, I've essentially been reinvesting it back in different projects in Indianapolis ever since. I've had, other unfortunate things happen where, I've had 2 property managers make off with my money. I've had a really unfortunate kind of contractor situation as well, where a contractor didn't make off with my money, but didn't finish the job. So now I have somebody else there to finish it. So all these things can go wrong. But to your point, the real estate can be very, very forgiving. And bottom line is, it hasn't been so bad that it sets me back for a very long time, or has that all kind of led me to believe that I should not be doing real estate. If anything, you just learn to prepare better. And based off that sewer scope example, that's now built into a checklist that I have. So every time I'm doing due diligence on a new process, I just kind of load that checklist and that's on there. And I don't ever skip that. And, back to Ziona's point, like, yeah, it gets expensive, but it's just the cost of doing business. Full home inspection is about $350. The sewer scope inspection is about another $200. So you're out close to $600 just to decide, should I buy this property or not? And you typically have to go through a handful of them before you find one that works. So it is expensive. It's not fun, but it will save you tens of thousands of dollars. So got to do it.
It's kind of fun.
It is very
just
fun.
A little.
One question for you, and I wonder just kind of about your contractors. Do you send your contractors the inspection report and just say, hey, like, what would it cost to fix everything on this inspection report? Are they willing to do that?
So part of how I have evolved and now will continue to evolve on a recent flip, what I did is, that's exactly what I did. I just set up a Zoom call. We had the photos, we had the inspection report. It was my contractor. It was my realtor. Hey guys, let's game plan. What should we do here? What should we not do here? And that was super helpful because there is no assuming. We were getting crystal clear together. We are acting as a team, and we were able to make some decisions that actually saved us some money. For one, the cabinets were actually very salvageable. We initially thought that they weren't. And my realtor showed me a comparable listing that he had just listed and showed me, hey, look, Ernesto, I think this is how we can make them look. And we did that, and they came out great. The other thing we learned is that all the comparables, some of them had no appliances, some of them had used appliances, like they clearly were not brand new. So rather than me buying a package of brand new appliances, we decided that the market was basically telling us we don't have to do that. So the inspection port is super helpful.
Nice.
That's great. Yeah. And I think I love that your realtor, it sounds like you've got a savvy realtor, because it sounds like he knew to look at the comps on the street and not overdress the house, right? If you're putting quartz countertops and these shaker cabinets and all that stuff in a C neighborhood, then something doesn't match, right? You're overbuilding. That's a common mistake.
Yeah. In the spirit of sharing best practices, and again, how I continue to evolve as a result of mistakes that have happened to me, I think we underutilize home inspectors. If you think about a hard money lender, a lot of them, it's standard practice for them to reimburse you for the rehab. So they're not just fronting you the money. Like, you have to come up with it. And then once you confirm that the repairs have been completed, then they pay you out for that. So you can continue to kind of fund the rehab that way. And one of the things that they do is they send out an inspector. They're not doing a full home inspection, but they are confirming, yes, this amount of work has been completed. And yes, it is up to code. And that's something that I learned from one of my best friends in having been in this business, Dan Perez, who will probably listen to this podcast, is razor sharp and smart investor. I think him and his wife have scaled up to like 70 units in 2 years in Indianapolis, but that's what they do. Their inspector is frequently on their rehabs, and they pay the inspector by the hour, and they have very little to no surprises to make sure that work is being done on time, it's being done well, and everything's up to code.
Oh, that's really smart.
I don't think I've ever heard that. I don't think I've ever heard anyone rehire their inspector to go inspect the contractor's work. Like, it just seems so obvious, but I've never heard anyone say that before. That's awesome.
And I've asked them, I had this conversation with a different inspector recently in Indianapolis. I said, what do you bill per hour? If I don't have a full kind of home inspection for you, what do you bill per hour? He said $75 to $100 an hour. So cool. If I have a month-long rehab and I pay you to go out there just 2 times and give me a walkthrough, photos, videos, yes, everything's up to code, some of the best money you can spend.
Oh, dude, 100%. I am 100% doing that from now on.
Yeah.
That's a great tip, man.
Yeah.
Cool. So let's kind of move on a little bit from this, right? So you've got these 2 properties from that first BRRRR so thing you did in Indianapolis. How much passive income did you get from that? And in what year did you actually finish that project, refinance it, and all that?
That was altogether a 6-month kind of process. And, these are Midwest properties. These are cheaper properties. So am I rich or getting close? No. I mean, I net from each of those properties combined, due to recent rent raises, come out like $525 combined, which isn't like life-changing, but I think the practice that you get and just getting going in the kind of right direction is super helpful. And since then, I've decided that based off kind of where I am in my life, based off what I've learned, the resources that I have, and being able to kind of redeploy those proceeds and not chunking down 20 and 25% per acquisition, I'm currently now focusing on flips. So I have 3 different flips at different phases. One, we're in escrow. The other one's getting listed this week, and the other we're under contract on. We should be closing soon. I've decided that based off what I've learned, and again, one of the big advantages of the BRRRR is that I'm not sinking down so much capital, that in the short term, I'm going to shift to flips instead for myself.
I'm curious about flips. Like, I don't know. Do you think that the ball is going to drop at some point here where it's like everybody's so hungry, and there's no inventory, people are buying up a storm, but like, at some point, I think like when too many people are doing the same thing, it starts to set off warning bells in my head. It's kind of like Bitcoin or anything like that, GameStop and all that kind of stuff. It's like you just kind of expect the bottom to drop out at some point. I'm a big believer in homes. I will always buy them. But flips, you can get stuck with a flip. So I'm curious what you think about that.
There's different ways to mitigate your risk, one of which I specifically kind of hang out in the median ARV ballpark. I know that the median ARV for a property in Indianapolis is about, depending on who you ask, $220,000 to $250,000. So if I'm doing a really high-end flip that is going to resell for like $500,000, like there's just not as many people in that city that I have a buyer's pool for. And there's a really specific example that I can give you. There's a pocket of Indianapolis called Bates Hendricks. And I've had 2 different conversations this week with realtors that I know. And they've kind of given me the skinny. That pocket just got oversaturated with developers and people that were getting really overzealous with flips. And Indianapolis as a city is still definitely a seller's market. But that pocket, you have inventory that's sitting there for a while. So if you are going far above kind of the median price point, you're just going to flat out have less people that are even going to be able to afford it. And secondly, I think the amount of work that goes into it, you should be factoring that into your returns. And what I mean by that is, am I willing to take a 20% return on something that requires me to go down to the studs and I'm doing a full gut and it's, a 4 to 5 month rehab process alone versus looking for similar returns on something that I'm in and out of in a matter of weeks. I did one recently where from close to close, from the acquisition close to closing on escrow, it was like a 50-day process. And did I make a ton of money?
Awesome.
My gross returns on that after everything were like, I think $19,000. So was it a ton of money? No, but it was super quick. So I guess the answer is that everyone's least favorite answer is it depends.
Thanks.
Anytime there's a debate on anything, it depends. So I've got another question for you that kind of question part one, part B. I was talking to Jay Scott one time. If you don't know who Jay Scott is, he's like a pretty big guy on the Bigger Pockets podcast and all that.
I love Jay Scott.
Yeah, he's awesome. And I was grabbing coffee with him one time, and he says, and he's a massive house flipper, right? Like I think in Atlanta and all that kind of stuff. And he said, I regret every house I've ever sold. And he says, like a lot of the investors he talks to says the same thing. And so I just wonder, like, do you think you're going to regret not keeping some of these houses, or do you keep like every third one, or do you have any sort of strategy there, or are you just kind of using the flipping as your, that's your moneymaker?
Yeah, I think for me, having just recently left my W-2 and wanting to continue to build kind of seed capital for myself, that's why I'm focusing on the flipping, apart from like where we are in this market cycle. Yes, long term, I mean, there's so many benefits, and Jay Scott probably could have retired by now. But this is, I think, the beauty of real estate. And I think an important decision that people have to make is, where are you in your life? What are your goals? How much capital do you have? How do you want to deploy it? And based off that, you can make a better decision about what's right for you. Even people that want to flip, people like to do different types of flips. Some people like to do new builds only. Some people are doing, I'm going to take this duplex, I'm going to go to the planning commission and have it create 2 condos or townhouses, and I can now list those separately. So for Jay Scott, in hindsight, sure, it's 2020, but I'm willing to bet in the beginning, he needed flips to get going and then reinvest in his business.
The butterfly effect, right? Like one little thing changes and your whole life changes. So yeah, 100%. That's awesome, man. So it sounds like your story is pretty inspiring, right? You kind of started off with the whole Mr. Money mustache, thing, financial independence, woo-woo, like no more working at W-2. You probably went down the index fund path. You probably realized that wasn't quick enough for you, right? It's still going to take you 10 or 15 years of kind of slave labor at Verizon to get there. You still want bigger pockets. Sounds like you do it much quicker. You couldn't invest in Oakland. Well, you did not stop there. You went over to Indianapolis, bought your first BRRRR, kept those in your portfolio. That worked so well. You started building out your contacts, building out your reputation. And now you've doing full-time flips out in Indianapolis. Is that a good summary of your story?
More or less, yeah. I mean, the fact that I now have so much confidence in the network and the resources and what I've learned, that I know that I'm going to be able to, at worst case scenario, like replace my W-2 income. It gives me the freedom to then go and do things that in the past I might have been, scared to do. My goal this year in Indianapolis is to do at least 10 flips. Again, we have 3 right now, constantly looking at more deals. So I'm confident that I'm going to be able to get there. And how you achieve financial freedom or how you achieve time freedom, that's really up to you. I see this question posed on social media more and more often. Would you rather have $1 million net worth, or would you rather have $10,000 a month that you can consistently generate with not a ton of time, effort on your part? And everybody's going to have a different response. It's just a different way of looking at outcomes that people are looking for.
What's your response?
Me personally, again, for where I am in my life, I would take the $10,000 a month. That's not super time intensive any day of the week.
Same here.
Nice.
Because if you think about it, I guess obviously I'm a nerd, right? And so I'm thinking like $1 million, if it's going to be a 4,000 or a 4% return on your investment or whatever, like you'd put in the market or whatever, the 4% rule, that's like $40,000 a year, which is less than $4,000 a month, right? So it seems like 10,000 is an obvious answer.
Yeah. And I think just in conversations with people that are like, well, how am I going to come up with $20,000 a year to put my kid through this private high school? Like, I don't think it's crazy hard. Once you learn and you kind of know better, I think if more people understood just the fundamentals of real estate and what strategy does work in their local area, for example, in the Bay Area, and in Oakland specifically, an overlooked strategy that absolutely works. I mean, we analyze deals all day is house hacking, renting by the room, or there's plenty of small multifamily. It's whether people are willing to kind of make that short-term sacrifice or not.
I was talking to a dude actually in the Bay Area. I think he was in the East Bay as well, Oakland area. And what he was doing was like super interesting. He bought like a massive lot. I think it was like a 17,000 square foot lot. And there's some rule in Oakland where you can, I don't know the square footage to building ratio or whatever, but he was able to add like 3 ADUs on this one lot. So he basically makes a 4-plex with detached ADUs on one lot. And it's like a huge value add, and it's going to cash flow them a whole ton. Have you seen that at all in your area?
Absolutely. So the state of California, and I don't know the ins and outs of this, but I know the state of California, as of, I think it was January of 2019, got really, really relaxed on what people can do in terms of ADUs. And I think I know the state of California was so frustrated with kind of the not in my backyard people in certain counties and cities, just pushing back on development, that in the state of California, there's very, very minimal restriction now to converting garages, converting basements, building the ADU. I mean, a new ground up construction ADU is probably not going to be your cheapest option, but it's nice to know that from a zoning and kind of a regulation standpoint, there's very little that's holding you back. So if you're willing to kind of get creative, there's a guy on our team here in our office who took I want to say it's like a 1,700 square foot house with a detached 2-car garage. And without having touched the garage, he's kind of reconfigured the floor plan to do 3 separate living kind of areas, and he's doing rent by the room. And I need to check in with him on what his numbers are going to be, but I know at minimum he's going to be living for free. And this is a property that's in a great location in the Bay Area that long-term is going to be fantastic for him.
So my question for you is, when are you building your mom an ADU? Is that happening?
So one of the ideas that I posed, because her lot is about 5,000 square feet, it's a good sized lot. We can put up a fence so that she still has her own private backyard. And then we'll put up the ADU. She's not yet hit to it because my brother lives with her and rents out one of her rooms. But it's absolutely a possibility. And again, going back to the amount of equity that we have and that HELOC, worst case scenario, that's how we can finance it. You pay it off in probably 5-6 years, depending on the amount that you collect on it. And she can basically hang it up whenever she wants. And she's just decided, I don't want to do that yet. But it's nice to know that she has the flexibility.
That's awesome. I think maybe in the 10-year anniversary, 2023. Ernesto, I've got another question for you that I probably should have asked like 10 minutes ago.
Sure.
So you don't have a W-2 anymore, so that income is not necessarily guaranteed. Have you ran into any snags or troubles trying to secure lending, especially on the refinances with that?
Since I'm currently not doing rentals, refinancing is not really a concern to me. I mean, there are more and more lenders out there that are doing asset-based loans. The interest rates are not as favorable, but you can still obtain them. They don't do the conforming kind of 10 property limit. And there's more and more lenders that are doing those things. And given the reserves that I have to be able to fund my flipping business, along with some private money partners that I have now, funding of projects in the short term is really not kind of a big concern for me.
Okay. Yeah. And just giving us like a high level version or view, how many deals have you done and how many do you actually own? Do you just own those 2 and your mom's place?
All inclusive, if you take my rentals and the flips that I've done, I'm at 9.
9 deals. Awesome. Yeah.
So I still very much consider myself a rookie.
Well, it's good. It's good that you stay humble like that too. I know a lot of people who have done like 2 deals and think they're experts. So
everyone's a coach on social media.
That's
Everyone's got a coaching program.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. Awesome, man. Well, I think we should head out into the final part of our show, which is the Final 4. Z, you want to kick us off?
Dun, dun. Yes. Our first question for you is, what are you reading right now? Sounds like you're a big reader.
I am, and I used to not be, but Bigger Pockets and real estate in general kind of sparked my interest in reading all over again. I'm actually rereading a book that I really, really enjoyed. It's called Building a Story Brand by Donald Miller.
I am so drinking that Kool-Aid. Yes, I got Craig into it.
Yeah. I hired like someone from that you recommended, Z. Literally everything is you. Yeah.
I see Craig do some of that in his social media. That does not surprise me, but great read. Yeah.
So good. Yeah, he just put out a 3rd book, but I have a 2nd book here, Marketing Made Simple. I was like working on my website today. Yeah. And I was just like looking through it, being like, yes, he's so good.
It is literally a manual for like how to build your website and what it should have.
It's awesome.
Yeah,
I've heard a lot of good things, especially from Z. Ernesto, what is the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Best piece of advice I ever received is from another book that I really recommend. It's called The 4 Agreements. And one of the 4 agreements is do not assume. And it's amazing. At least once a day, there's some sort of just a final tidbit of information or a conversation that could have ended a different way because one person, or maybe both, just assumed. So when we take just one more step to get just one more little bit of clarity, it changes everything.
I love that. And I love that book. That's one of my favorite books I've ever read.
Yeah.
Nice. What is your why?
My why is, now that I don't have a W-2 and I have more time freedom and I can truly do the things that I want to do and I think are worth doing, I want to start putting out some content and play a more active role in just helping. Maybe this is not a good way to describe it, but like, I mean, not the lower class because they're not lower class, but how do we get people from kind of the bottom of the economic tier in America into the middle? I think there's a lot of resources and conferences, people that we celebrate that represent like massive abundance, but how do we get people from like, I know everybody wants $10,000 in passive a month, but what would it do for a typical American to just figure out how to get to like $1,500 a month? I think it just gives them kind of an amount of security that then gives them permission to take a little bit more risk. So, and I just feel like that type of stuff is lacking. So figuring out ways that I can kind of participate in that conversation, in that community, to start helping people realize that it's doable, maybe at a smaller but equally impactful scale.
Yeah, I love that about real estate is I feel like it levels or it evens the playing field. I mean, it seems like you need a lot to get into it, but actually, if you're scrappy and you make good relationships, anybody can get into it. And so I love kind of taking those underdogs that, especially younger people that are excited, that, will follow through and are true to their word. It doesn't take a lot to be good at it. So yeah, I agree with what you're saying.
Yeah, I would say the second thing is me being a Spanish speaker. There's really not a lot out there in terms of kind of bilingual content. So some of the stuff that I've been kind of recording and getting a blog going soon and making sure that we have things for people in the Spanish community to kind of get in the game as well is another priority of mine.
Awesome.
Love that. Yep. All right, man. What are some fun and interesting alternatives to war that countries could settle their differences with?
It's like a Cards Against Humanity card. I would say pillow fight, man. Let's just pillow fight it out.
Love that, man. Yeah. You take like your king, we'll take our president, and imagine like Joe Biden versus Putin in like a pillow fight. I mean,
Putin's got like a 6-pack.
You're taking Putin versus
Probably.
Joe Biden in a pillow fight.
So you see those like shirtless pictures of Putin on his horse? Like, dude, he's got this. Against Biden, yes.
Dude, Biden was ripped back in the day. I don't know if
my girlfriend's like, for a really old guy, Biden's kind of handsome. He's got that little wink that he does. I'm like, I guess you're right.
You got some competition, Ernesto.
Yeah, right.
Awesome, man. Well, where can people find out more about you?
I'm probably most active on Instagram. It's Ernesto Hernandez. I think my handle is hi. I'm Ernesto. That's kind of representative of my gentle nature, I like to think. So if I ever see you in public, hi, I'm Ernesto.
Awesome.
But that's where I'm probably most accessible.
That's
Awesome.
so funny.
Yeah.
That sounds like a late night DJ. Just like something about that smooth jazz.
Hi, I'm
Yeah.
Ernesto. I like it. Cool, man. Well, hey, thank you so much for coming on the show. Next time we'll have to have the bottle of tequila with us. I've told my girlfriend all about you because she loves tequila. And I was like, dude, you got to go see Ernesto's place because he's got like more tequila than I've ever seen in my life.
Well, aside from the drinking aspect of it, I think it's the most misunderstood and underrated spirit. And people drink it and they have no idea what they're putting in their bodies. If they were actually see like the process and understand beginning to end how tequila is made, I think it would blow everybody's socks off. So, and it's like the fastest growing category in spirits. And I just love it, man. I love tequila country and being in the distilleries and in the fields. Clearly, you know this about me. It's my thing, man. I love it.
Yeah, your second or maybe first passion, right? Maybe you're doing real estate to buy your tequila.
Maybe, right?
Awesome, man. Boy, thanks again so much for coming on the show, dude.
My pleasure, man. I hope this is helpful.
We'll be in touch about, maybe catching up offline too.
Yeah, dude, I would love that. Absolutely.
And that was Ernesto, my friend. Z, what'd you think about Ernesto?
I think it's a really inspiring story. I love hearing those low numbers. Like, it's just like mind blowing that you can buy a house for so cheap for $37,000 and it be a livable place. So yeah, really cool. And I love that he took a swerve after doing some BRRRRs to learn about flipping and realize that that's going to get him to his next goals. Yeah, I just think all around it was really great. The thing that I didn't ask him, and I really want to, is does he still want that Mercedes? Because I want a fancy car. I just need to buy a house that pays for the fancy car. Like that's going to be the Mercedes house. And the $500 a month is for the Mercedes.
I love that's how you think, right? You're going to buy a house to pay for your luxury item. And I think that's amazing to do that. Like once you've hit base financial independence and you've got your expenses covered, yeah, buy a house to cover your stuff, right? That's how the world works. I love that. One thing I love about Ernesto, and it just tells you the type of guy that he is that he put his mom and his family first, like before him. And man, I wish I had the courage to do that. Like he bought his mom a place before he even bought his own place, right? And his mom, I'm sure, was doing fine in Mexico. I doubt she was like, really doing that poorly. Otherwise, he would have probably been in Mexico with her. And so the fact that he just did that for her and bought her a nice place in Monterey, California, that just is a true testament to who he is. And I think that's one of the reasons why I love that dude so much.
Yeah, he's got a lot of heart. I wonder what that down payment was. It was probably pretty hefty.
I can only imagine. Yeah. Cool. Well, amazing episode. Everyone, it's a super help if you guys can leave us a rating, a comment, a review on iTunes or wherever you can. Just allows us to get feedback and allows us to make the show better. So please do share with your friends, anyone who's looking to get on that path towards financial independence. We're always happy to help and happy to chat. So Z, you got anything else for us before we head out?
Nope. Thanks so much for listening, guys.
We'll see you next week.